26th day of June 2024, and so much more. I'm going to be your host, Dana Durnford. You can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. Hope everybody's having a good day. We got a poll. We got one viewer. We got 2 likes and 2 votes after almost 3 hours. Is Australia pro-nuclear media blitz meant to make society in Australia incompetent so they can tiptoe nuclear power in the back door? Certainly appears that way, doesn't it? There's so many lies told just in the last 7 days or so since the media blitz in Australia began. I would imagine everybody in Australia is just tortured with the constant propaganda from the nuclear industry. Nuclear power is the only reliable source of energy. This is absurdness. It's absurd to suggest that nuclear power is the only reliable source of energy. Like, it's insane to suggest it. And nuclear power is the only reliable source of energy. First off, there's such a thing called geothermal. Every community can build a geothermal plant. They don't even have to try. Any engineering company can do it. They don't got to bring in special this, special that. You don't need the degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency involved. Nuclear power is the only... And now, we covered this guy, Tony Irwin. He's a perpetual lawyer. He's really... I don't understand how people like that are able to keep their degrees. He tells that many lies. Saying nuclear power is the only reliable source of energy. And this, every time there's a crisis in the nuclear industry, they roll out Tony Irwin, and Tony Irwin says the same thing every time. The truth is, nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, bar nothing. And it's really interesting how we see the nuclear industry just throttle any other type of energy sources. Oh, that can't work. Only nuclear can work. There's no such thing as renewables because only nuclear can work. You can't come up with any technologies. You can't develop it because you can't get funding because it all has to go to the nuclear industry. Assistant Defense Minister Thistlethwaite says nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, and the Australians will face a very big increase if Australia adopts it. I think the numbers are around $22,000 per person is what the 7 reactors they're planning on if they get, the opposition was in power for 10 years. They never mentioned nuclear a single time. And now that they're out, they're desperate to get back in, and they think, and probably they're right, that nuclear is the holy grail for the industry to support them to go back in. It's the best way to rob a country of its future. It's the best way to destroy its food and water. And it's the best way to destroy their pensions because the nuclear industry loves to co-opt the pension funds and then liquidate those assets and throw it away on the nuclear industry. And Peter Dutton, his level of degeneracy over the last 7 days is really spectacular. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. He doesn't have a clue. He's just pandering to the nuclear industry, and he figures, and he's probably right, that will get him elected. We know that nuclear is the most expensive form of energy that there is. That's been confirmed by Cicero. We're talking about a very large cost for this policy that will flow onto the consumers. And they're going to face a very, very big increase in electricity and their energy bill. But they don't know the details at the moment. In fact, the opposition says we'll release the details after we're elected. But what's amazing about it is you have this massive, unbelievable, sustained bombardment of a media blitz from the nuclear industry. Obviously, you're talking a huge amount of money. If you put that energy into geothermal, all their problems would have been solved a long time ago. Nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, says the Labour MP. And of course, anybody who knows anything about this subject knows that's true. Andrew Miller and the Peter Dutton's nuclear plant, like phone books, do we simply have better tools now? As India nuclear power program refocuses on plutonium, nuclear study provides a major update on plutonium isotope fission. And so this industry every once in a while will throw us a little tidbit of reality that's going on that they managed to keep well hidden from everybody. Researchers published a unique measurement of the energy of the neutrons produced by the plutonium-240 fission. There's also 238, 239, 241s, for instance. So, I believe this is India. Yeah. Started the core loading process of a prototype fast breeder reactor in India. And the first stage used uranium isotopes as nuclear fuel in a pressurized water reactor to produce plutonium-239. And the second stage is more concerned with the plutonium fission. When a plutonium-239 nucleus captures a neutron, it has a 27 to 38% chance of becoming plutonium-240 instead of undergoing fission. It is thus present in many nuclear reactors and in the fallout of nuclear weapons testing. It is thus present in many nuclear reactors in the fallout of nuclear fuel pools. All nuclear fuel pools are hemorrhaging plutoniums 238, 239, 240, 241. And that's forever. They never go away. And they're vicious to everything with replicating cells. And they're actually named after the devil. Plutonium is named after the devil because of its insidious effects upon everything with replicating cells. When plutonium-240 captures a neutron, it most often turns into plutonium-241. On the off chance it does undergo fission, however, there's a significant amount of uncertainty about the energy carried away by its fission products. Researchers currently use models to incorporate several complicated calculations based on a theory to estimate the output. And this was based on the CANDU reactors from Canada, which the only way to describe them are perpetual disease factories. First off, like the Point Leper, New Brunswick, releases legally, because they can't contain it, 14,600,000 trillion tritium-3H atoms each year. They got a 12-year half-life, 120-year life. And so every year you're releasing this massive, just from that single reactor. All the other CANDU reactors are doing the same thing, but not quite of the incredible toxic amount we're seeing from the Point Leper, New Brunswick, which is on the Atlantic Ocean. The rest of them are on the Great Lakes, the biggest aquifers on the entire planet. It's literally the worst industry conceivable. National leader David Littleproud said he was not worried about the impacts of potential nuclear meltdown in Australia. You're going to love this stuff, folks. Saying that his party managed to withstand a Barnaby Jones meltdown once every 3 to 4 months without any issues. So he's equating an actual nuclear meltdown that destroys insects and birds and animals and humans very far away for very long periods of time, long past the typical human experience, with somebody having an outburst every 3 or 4 months. It's revolting that they look in the mirror and they think of themselves as humans, but clearly they don't have any of these attributes. A lot of people are saying, look at what happened in Chernobyl, look what happened in Fukushima, what if we have that kind of a meltdown here? And he said, my response is, we have had that sort of meltdown in Australia all the time. But we're like, my goodness. Like, how can a media publish something like that without disparaging the person that says it? Every time Barnaby has a bender, have you seen the stuff that he spews out is toxic? So downplaying the enormity, the heartbreak, the monstrous effects of Chernobyl, there's orphanages all over Belarus and Ukraine full of disfigured children. They closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom because of Chernobyl, for instance. And the amount of people harmed is catastrophic. It's the numbers are stunning. Because there's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. The list is very long. Your immune system is compromised. You're also more susceptible to an incredible host of pathogens and viruses. And to just brush it off as if we're talking about lint on his clothing or something. It's you see this with the British, and you see it with the Australians in particular. This disconnect of reality, of humanity, of the human experience. I don't know. Like, these people obviously are success driven. And they claw and they murder their way up till they get the top jobs in government. And then this kind of contempt for truth, these people should be locked up in a psychiatric ward and studied to see if we can come up with a cure for that kind of... These are sociopaths, psychopaths. So it's not the idea for people living in the vicinity. There's a 200-kilometer radius that puts on high alert for a few weeks afterwards, but we get through it. So saying that the effects of the radioactive fallout only lasts a couple of weeks. And this is what I mean by Australia's nuclear nutty untruths. This is nutty. And you won't hear this from any other country. It's just Australia and United Kingdom will say stuff like this. And it's like they're talking to fourth graders or fifth graders. Like they're talking to people that are incapable of using the blinkers on a car, for instance, or incapable of riding a bicycle, maybe. Or how the hell did we ever get to a society that can build skyscrapers and everything else, but then would say something like this? How does that actually work? A nuclear meltdown is described as occurring where the core overheats and it can cool down quickly. It can't cool down quickly enough before posting a video on social media or shouting obscenities while prone on a footpath. Like, what the hell? Where does this stuff actually come from? So they're saying like a temper tantrum. We've seen the Japanese saying that radiation was like a bitter wife or something, right? It's really not as big as an issue as people think. There's an initial explosion, there's a bit of a cleanup job, and then a few months later it's back up and functioning and vying to be the deputy prime minister again, Littleproud said. Initial explosion, a bit of a cleanup, and a few months later it's back up and functioning. It's not as big as an issue as people think. Like, it's pretty easy to lose hope for this planet when you find people like that. I did, but they don't have the attributes of people, do they? He said people claimed they didn't want to live near a nuclear plant were being over the top. I have to sit 5 feet away from Barnaby in Parliament every day. You get used to it, trust me, he says. Again, like when you breathe in the radioactive emissions, the anthropogenic man-made emissions, your body attacks with white blood cells for the rest of your life and builds a tumor around it. But you also compromise your immune system because you're producing so many white blood cells. So there's... And like whoever wrote that story is really, really clever with nuclear. They understand nuclear unbelievably well in order to draw these kinds of parables that don't have nothing to do with it, but to do with emotions, for instance. Like they're equating a nuclear meltdown with an emotion. But in order to do that, you have to really understand the true horror of nuclear meltdowns. And you're disguising it as... It's brilliant brainwashing. If you're a monster, if you're an alien from another solar system, maybe. I can't comprehend why somebody would be that evil, but there's certainly a lot of them out there, isn't it? Rabuka contends with test results on Fukushima. Rabuka, the Fiji Times. Let me show you these pictures. Around this site, you're very familiar with these pictures, right? Prime Minister satisfied with Japan's test results on Fukushima treated nuclear water released into the Pacific Ocean more than a year ago. Of course, the reactors are actually completely destroyed. They're 100% nuclear meltdowns. In other words, the emissions have been going on, not since last year, but for 13 years. That's Reactor 3, for instance, at Fukushima. And that was a plutonium mixed oxide facility. It was a plutonium mixed oxide facility. Bear with me. It's a plutonium mixed oxide facility. Japan's government officials yesterday confirmed that it continued to update the Pacific Island leaders, including shitbrains from the Prime Minister of Fiji, about the test results showing no presence of radioactive elements in the treated wastewater. Today, they can't treat the water from these things. It's all going straight in the ocean. If you're talking about multiple sieverts per liter, if you put that in a tank, you can't build any more tanks and you can't get back on the site. You can't step over the hoses connected to the tanks. You can't walk past those hoses. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. This stuff that they're pouring water over these remains, and it's picking up these particles for starters. And if you put that into a filter, of course, now the filter is so radioactive after about 20 minutes you can never get in the facility where the filtration is to, which is the Alps. They had their Riva system, which is the same as the Alps, but the French. They had the Korean system. They had the series systems. None of these work because all the atoms are the same size. So you have to filter everything in order to filter the anthropogenic man-made atoms. And they can't do that, obviously, right? You can't. If you contain the stuff, then the containment is so radioactive you can't get near it. And the fact that there's more than one tank on the site is the proof that there's nothing in the tanks, because if you fill it up, there was no filtration system. Just let me go backwards for you. So in 2013, they released these photos and they brought in the media. And this was the Alps decontamination system 2013. In 2014, in August, almost the end of 2014, they just announced recently that they think they finally have the Alps decontamination system operational. Again, like, you're talking about 2015, but you can't turn these systems on. The tanks were all filled in 2013, according to the BBC. Let me play that clip for you because that's actually kind of important.
The Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So, on the one hand, you got them saying all tanks were filled in 2013. Remember, they also had 865,000 cancers in the first year. You got the buildings detonated. You got plume models covering the planet in 26 days in that model. In the Francis model, you're talking about 1 million to 10 million atoms, an actual study, 10 million atoms of cesium-137 covering the entire planet. In this updated version of France's government's model, based on 31 days. So when this model stops, it's 31 days of radioactive fallout of cesium-137 and up to 10 million atoms per square meter, cubic meter of air, covering the entire planet. And this stuff pulses energy 600 feet. So you have an invisible snowstorm of radiation covering the entire planet, pulsing energy. Each atom can pulse 600 feet every second for hundreds of years, just the cesium-137. Of course, you can't have it just cesium-137. The biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is the curium isotopes. You need lead shielding 30 times thicker, or 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium isotopes. We know for a fact there was no filtration system even in 2015, but yet in 2013 all the tanks were full according to the BBC. There was 1,000 tanks, right? That's not the only sources we got, by the way. You have Unit 1, Unit 2, complete detonations, ejected reactor cores out of the buildings. And the fuel pools with around 8 reactor cores out of the buildings. We've never seen anything like this in human history. And these reactors were plutonium, uranium reactors. Unbelievable volatile. You had the media, including ABC Australia in the bottom right-hand corner. That's ABC Australia, claiming that they're 140 feet above the stump to your left, looking down on the fuel pool that doesn't exist. That's Australia. That's Australia media right there. Who's now, Cecilia Vega's now in the White House Press Club. And everybody, because you can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or or pick it up or throw rocks at it or perceive it, they think they're immune to this. They think that it's not going to get them. It'll get everybody else, but it won't get them. It won't get their children. It won't get their grandparents. It won't get them or their loved ones or their significant others. This is delusional at best thinking. This is denial. Nobody can escape it. It covers the entire planet. I already showed you the models. And it's a nasty combination. The plutonium mixed oxide fuel is a horrifying combination. The emissions from these are so catastrophic. But yet here's Japan last year claiming that there's no presence of radioactive element in the water, but the whole planet was buried in radioactive fallout. And so they're claiming that no emissions got out till last year and everything that got out was filtered first. Is one of the most insane statements imaginable, but yet there it is. And that's their metric, is they're going to use the false narrative, and they know it's a false narrative. And they're willing to poison everybody in their country so that they can gain. And people live in denial and think that this is not affecting them or their loved ones. Is a fatal mistake for everybody. Aaron Poole's Dada evokes both awe and dread in the road trip film set near nuclear power facilities in Canada. The Canadian filmmaker features a directorial debut, subverts expectations of a father-daughter story. And I wonder what the hell they're up to, because they're set near a nuclear power facility, which I believe is Lake Huron, so it's Canadian. And having worked with esteemed talents, including Atom, so there's no pun intended in that one, is it? And they're located right next to a nuclear power facility in their cabin in the woods, which is, to me, one of the scariest thoughts imaginable, because the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem 24 hours a day. You know, you build these reactors, and after about 14, 15 months, you're taking reactor cores, parts of the reactor core out, and you're putting it in a fuel pool with no containment. The fuel pools are going to boil off about 120,000 liters of hideous, toxic emissions, radiation. And so that boils off up the tall, skinny stacks, and then you have radioactive fallout, and that's perpetual. And typically, all the nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms, which is one of the most terrifying thoughts imaginable. Initially, it was inspired by the appearance of a nuclear facility on a landscape that I expected to be empty, he explained to a moron Yahoo Canada. Right next to Lake Huron, because Lake Huron, Lake Superior, Lake Ontario, these are the biggest freshwater aquifers on the entire planet. And they're surrounded by American, Canadian nuclear facilities that are hemorrhaging radiation into that system 24 hours a day. It's unconscionable that they done that. And it's unconscionable that there's no dissenting voices. And I can guarantee you that's not going to be a descending voice from that movie. The 14th edition of the Summer School on Nuclear Decommissioning and Waste Management. The 14th edition of Summer School on Nuclear Decommissioning. So they don't have any decommissioning credibility after 80 years whatsoever. There's so many nuclear Superfund sites on the planet. There's so many sites out there that should be Superfund sites. It's hard to comprehend how these people, how the world can view these, whatever you want to call them. I can't call them people. I can't justify calling these creatures people. They are destroying the ecosystem, and people are just completely blind. They're not. They know what they're doing. They've bought into it at a very young age. And the more evil you are in the nuclear industry, the more money you're going to make. Are you fascinated by the idea, and they prefer to only hire evil people? They're very vetted, and when they find real evil people, they'll hire them for key positions. Are you fascinated by the idea of making a nuclear site suitable again for conventional purpose uses? And would you like to work in emerging fields with great perspectives of career development to serve the noble cause of environmental remediation? You can't remediate the radioactive fallout from nuclear. It assimilates into everything. And it's a permanent curse. It's a plague. Just the best way to describe it is a plague. That's the model of 20 days of radioactive fallout of Neptunium-239. And so they're trying to entice people to come join them because they're not going to get those jobs for their kids. That's too dangerous. They want your kids to go there, right? Their kids are going to be the ones that are sending your kids there. The summer school is supported by the European Commission Joint Research Centre and is thus free of charge. Now they'll pay for it all just to get you in the door. And they're very thoughtful how evil works. The financial support will cover the course fees, accommodations, 5 to 6 nights, full board, and local transport. There was I don't know the exact number anymore because we covered this a lot of the times over many years. I know there was over 1,000 nuclear lighthouses, and they use radioactive material to generate electricity to run the lights, and they basically abandoned these places. They're so radioactive, and a nuclear power lighthouse in the Russia's Far East. So this was the Soviet Union originally, right? That was making over 1,000, 1,900. I can't remember the number. If anybody knows the number, I'll try to keep an eye on the comments there. A creepy lighthouse left to rot sits on a remote island, yet hundreds of tourists make a treacherous trip there each year. They're not creepy, they're deadly. And so some of these were in the most inaccessible areas imaginable. Now an attraction for tourists. Well, if they went around and did some, there was special teams, and they would use these long poles to pick up the source and to chop off the cables. And then they had big lead boxes. They would put the source into the lead boxes, which had long extended arms. And they would lug these things out of there. And I can guarantee you every one of the people that had those jobs got incredibly sick and passed it on to their loved ones because their clothing was radioactive too. And so when they done laundry, they would have contaminated everybody else's laundries and the washing machines. Left abandoned for over 30 years. These are true horror stories. And who knows what else they've been up to is the terrifying question. At the time, the southern half of the 600-mile-long island was part of the Japanese. Remember, the Japanese occupied North Korea for 50 years, up until Nagasaki, Hiroshima, right? The structure, and now North Korea has been occupied by United Nations or land, sea, and air embargoes for 70 years. So they've been in prison for 120 years. And if you've been in prison for 128 years and you don't fight to try to get free, then there's something really wrong, right? It once housed 12 crew members and was powered by nuclear energy. Not all of these facilities were housed. Built by the Japanese engineers from 1937 to 1939, it was designed to alert maritime traffic. Its exposed position meant the light which revolved on a bed of liquid mercury. Liquid mercury. My goodness. Could be seen up to 19 nautical miles away. So you got a nuclear power source and the lights sitting on a bed of liquid mercury. It's just mind-numbingly insane. However, it did require a lot of maintenance and extra resources, and equipment often broke down. Yeah, no, just nothing but... Forget NuScale power. Next story. Forget NuScale power. 2 nuclear power stocks to buy instead. Forget NuScale power. This is Motley Crue or something. Yeah, Motley Fool, which is a pro-nuclear rag. And this is just to get you in the gate, right? Forget NuScale power, which you should, by the way. Disgusting NuScale. As an interesting company, if you think nuclear power is going to be a key form of clean energy in the future, there's just one minor problem. The company doesn't have a functional product after 18 years. Billions of dollars. They didn't even buy a piece of land. No intention of building anything. They stole 90% like every other nuclear company. They steal 90% of the investors' money through administration. And so it's always a Ponzi scheme, right? So the next investors are paying the first investors, and then the next investors are paying the second investors, and the next investors. And so it takes a while before the scheme unravels, but that's certainly what happened with NuScale. The company doesn't have a functional product. If you like the idea of a nuclear power, prefer to own companies that are more developed, and you might want to consider Camco or the Southern Company. These are fly-by-nights when it comes to stocks. Like, the idea is for you to spend your money, and they've been at this a very long time. We covered it for a very long time, this typical scam. These are Ponzi schemes. The next investor covers the first investor, and etc. And that's the system, and we see it everywhere with the nuclear industry. NuScale Power's hope is that it can build small nuclear reactors in a factory at a relatively low cost. And they were given every opportunity in the world, weren't they? They were given all the money imaginable that they could ever hope for. And they didn't even try to build something. And strictly about ripping off the investors, because the government money doesn't matter. They're with the government. They're throwing kickbacks. But there is no checks and balances to hold them accountable is the scariest part. And so NuScale reactors were going to be equal to about $19 billion for half a large reactor when you scaled it up. And they're going to be using a very high assay, very high grade fuel, military grade fuel. And the toxicity of this fuel is just, its emissions for the next million years is catastrophic because everything is a brutally hot particle. They are expected to be safer. And so they make up their safer, quicker, faster, smaller, like ship in the back of truck. We've heard all of these connotations, and none of them have any hope to come into fruition. None of them. And the media is just, it doesn't care. Its job is to hit you with propaganda from every direction. The problem is that it still hasn't actually built a single small-scale modular nuclear power plant. It had every chance. It had all the money it could ever want. It stole everything. No intentions of doing it. None of these companies have an intention of doing it. It's simply about stopping you from coming up with real solutions. And by feeding you another fable to keep the nuclear industry somehow or another relevant for another year or another 6 months. It's a small modular nuclear reactors are a Ponzi scheme. And we've been covering it since, well, say in the last 10 years in particular, we've seen the evolution of each of these companies. And it's clear none of them have any intentions of building a reactor. They have every intentions of stealing at least 90% of the money through administration and then filter the other 10% back into the investors to keep them on the hook. Luckily, there are other ways to invest in nuclear power. Unfortunately, most people will never get to hear this knowledge. You do not want to invest in nuclear. Nuclear is a Ponzi scheme, no matter how you look at it. You are not going to come out on top. It looks like this carbon-free energy source, and calling this carbon-free is the most insane statement conceivable. It's the most resource-intensive industry ever created. It's not seeing a renaissance. Last year, the nuclear went backwards in 2023, 1.7 gigawatts. Renewables jumped 507 gigawatts. Think of a gigawatt as a large nuclear reactor, which is really about 0.89 of a gigawatt. In other words, last year, renewables was equal to, that came online in a 12-month period, not 12 years, but 12 months, was equal to about 570 large nuclear reactors in the animosity equivalent in renewable. And the price of uranium has dramatically increased in recent years, and that was through another Ponzi scheme. Right? Sprout's Physical Uranium Trust bought up the physical uranium that nobody was buying because of the doldrum in the nuclear industry. And now there was an artificial inflation because they needed some uranium to keep the current reactors running. So the mining companies were saying, well, there's a demand, we're going to open back up. But there was no demand. Sprout Uranium Physical Trust bought it up and never took possession of it, left it where it was to, and then that created an artificial inflation. And they've kept that, piggy banked that going for the last 3 years. And it's horrifying what they're actually doing to trick people into buying their uranium stocks. Assuming that the price of uranium doesn't fall dramatically again. No, it falls dramatically every second, third week. Right, they artificially inflate it for a week. People buy into it. That keeps it going for about a week. And then all of a sudden the investors or the original stockholders will sell their shares, make a pile of money, and the new investors lose their shirts and their life savings. Over and over, rinse and repeat. Every 2 or 3 weeks. Camco's performance is highly reliant on uranium prices. Uranium prices are artificially inflated every 2 or 3 weeks. And that's what they're doing here with these stories. It's trying to artificially inflate the uranium stocks again, right? They get another, and they will, because there's a lot of investors out there will sell this wolf ticket to you. It will benefit as new reactors like the ones NuScale is trying to build. NuScale is not trying to build a reactor. All the investors pulled out. They're being sued by the investors on top of that. There is no increase in demand for fuel. Reactors have gone backwards. They're not. There's no nuclear renaissance. Scary truth on civilian nuclear power are coming to the fore. What Australia really thinks about nuclear. Exclusive polling provides a detailed insight how Aussies feel about nuclear energy, including communities which could host a reactor. I mean, the media blitz in Australia, the propaganda is just it's unbelievable, really. Nuclear plant sparks a brutal meme onslaught. Danger Dutton. Peter Dutton and the 7 nuclear dwarfs. Danger Dutton. That's the appropriate answer for that guy. You know, he's really something. It's just absurd to have a big build-up for an announcement and then say, oh, well, we'll give you the details later. If they're elected, they'll give you the details. Electors will build the reactors, but we're not going to tell you how much or any details unless we're elected. But the media blitz behind it is real. It's real. Like, I've never seen so much propaganda. And this is day 7, I believe. It's stunning because typically we do a 24-hour news cycle, news show. And you can see how popular that is. The censorship on these shows is stunning, eh? I got 8 viewers. 8 viewers, eh? That's not insane. And we've been streaming for 40 minutes. This is insane. Now, if I was wrapping dog shit on a stick for fertilizer, there'd be 30,000 people here yucking it up, right? Is Australia pro-nuclear media blitz meant to make society incompetent to tiptoe nuclear in the back door? So that's a real pertinent poll, right? That's why that's not going to get any traction. The truth is not acceptable. The 1986 explosion at a reactor in Chernobyl, Ukraine, and 2011 meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan have heightened community concerns about the safety of nuclear power, even as the track record of such technology shows it poses minimal danger to civilians. There's so much going on in this simple paragraph, right? Heightened communities' concerns about the safety. You know, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags to try to, in Japan, and just 3% of the land of Fukushima prefecture. But the food was banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures, which is, because they're big prefectures, basically half of Japan, which never stopped growing food, the radioactive food in a radioactive nuclear wasteland, and shipping it worldwide and poisoning people. If we go nuclear, the regions will pay. Coalition wants nuclear. Why replace carbon with a carcinogen? That's a great one, isn't it? Isn't that fantastic? How can you not like that one? The combined generation of the proposed site will likely be no greater than 10 gigawatts, and a small proportion of the total electricity supply needed by 2050. Yeah, 3.7%, is it? And the money they're going to spend on it is enough to provide geothermal for the entire country forever. Because it'll pay for itself over and over and over, and you can have it right away. You don't got to wait. You don't have to go into speculations about small modular reactors and stuff like that. Everything's off the shelf. Any engineer company can go ahead and build it. It's silly how stupid and easy it actually is. And if the universities weren't so busy on fusion and fission, then they can resolve any hiccups in the. So, like, the biggest problem with geothermal was the extra couple of kilometers. So you can no problem to drill down 6-7 kilometers, which is a lot of heat there, right there. But if you can go down an extra few kilometers, for instance, in most places, you can tap into 1,000-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, which is way hotter than gas, oil, coal, or nuclear. And so now you got a real energy machine going at your fingertips. But just even a couple of 100 feet down is an incredible amount of energy. And the industry knows that the minute that geothermal breaks it into the lexicon, the worldwide narratives, gas, oil, and coal, and particularly nuclear, is done. Nobody's ever going to want to look at it again. And you know that moment is upon us. And so now they're trying to lock in governments and countries into a technology that shouldn't exist in the first place. That every facet and every attribute of it is catastrophic to everything with replicating cells. Forever, too. The emissions are forever. And all the reactor cores have a short lifespan in the reactor, but you're only going to use 2 or 3 or 4% of its energy. When you put it in the fuel pools, it's still splitting atoms. Those atoms are released 24 hours a day now with no containment. And typically they're surrounded by farms, so it's the best way possible to poison everything and everybody. It really is just it's such a heartbreaking industry. It's such a frightening industry because that's what they're up to. They don't have any redeeming qualities whatsoever. Nuclear industry workers face significant, inevitable, and unavoidable radiation health risk. Nuclear plant constructions worldwide appears to routinely involve a doubling of both cost and time to build, and so are dangerously irrelevant. And that's a great statement. Are dangerously irrelevant. And they always, if you can get away with just double the cost and double the time frame of the original estimates, you got off easy. But the reality of it is, once you take the fuel out of the reactor for the first cycle and put it in the fuel pool, you're under siege. Your immune systems and the insects and the birds and the animals, and particularly children and elderly's immune system now are under vicious siege. And it's not safe to go to the supermarkets because all of these sites are typically surrounded by farms. And anything within 100 miles is going to be coated with radioactive fallout 24 hours a day after the first fuel cycle goes into the fuel pools. This is just a heartbreaking story. Foreign students among 300 that are walking in the Miyagi prefecture despite the rain. Rain is typically associated with the fallout because it knocks the radioactive particles out of the sky. And so Miyagi is a nuclear wasteland not that far from Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. And there's tons of areas still off limits today because of incredible, debilitating, devastating radiation. So the 5th anniversary of the full opening was closed for 8 years because of radioactive fallout. And opening it back up doesn't mean the radioactive fallout went away. The reactors are still melting down in Japan. But this is how insane this industry actually is. Links 4 prefectures, and each of these are known nuclear wastelands. The entire prefectures. And think of prefectures as 6, 10, 15,000 square miles minimum. Just to give you some kind of concept, it's a huge area we're talking about. And it could be many times that, right? It was celebrated on Sunday with a walking event. It was closed down for 8 years. It's been open for 5 years. Despite bad weather due to the start of the rainy season, 300 victims, and these are victims, they don't understand the danger. They don't understand the bigger picture. They don't understand just breathing this stuff in is in your body for the rest of your life. Your body is immediately under siege from white blood cells. And not only that, they lull a lot of people in with these cartoons, like Pokemon. This is a weapon in Japan utilized to bring victims into a nuclear wasteland. It's one of the most despicable things conceivable because a lot of the children are drawn to these events. And they'll bug the parents. The parents don't understand, like you're learning right now or are already well aware of, the incredible harm from being exposed to this radiation. And families. The industry over and over and over targets families. The 7th European Nuclear Safety Conference. And every time you see the word safety in nuclear, how can you make it safe? There is no way to make it safe. Once the fuel comes out of the reactors and goes into the fuel pool, there's no containment. It's splitting atoms into the ecosystem. So, how many atoms do you got to split to boil a glass of water? The numbers are just unbelievable. And each atom can make you sick for the rest of your life. How many atoms do you got to split to boil water for 1 million homes and businesses? So when you take the fuel out of the reactor, you're still splitting those atoms, but there's no longer any containment like it was when it was in the reactor itself. Now there's no containment, and now it's just splitting atoms into the ecosystem 24 hours a day forever. And they never go away. And every year you're putting more fuel in the pool, so you're releasing more atoms, anthropogenic, man-made, dangerous atoms, into the ecosystem. And so when these reactors are getting 10, 20, 30, 40 years old, the emissions are just nightmarish. They're heartbreaking. They're devastating to anybody and everybody that's exposed to it, and it's permanent. The effects are permanent. So just driving by these reactors, and you got your window of your car down, your kids are in the back seat or something, and you're driving by a beautiful summer day, it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit out, and they got ice cream, and this radiation comes in, lands on their ice cream, they consume it, it sequesters in your muscles, their organs, their bones, and their body attacks it now for the rest of their lives with white blood cells. It's the worst case scenario. And it might not, there's heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal. There's all kinds of problems besides that. And you're talking about radioactive hormones, radioactive stem cells being produced perpetually too. And so the effects might not show up for 2, 3, 7, 12, 15, 20 years. They will show up. And it sterilizes the birds, the insects. It destroys the fungus, the bacteria in your forest. How can you make this stuff safe? You can't. We expect around 200 participants, including, I got that blocked out, from the civil nuclear field and also from the non-EU countries. The main objective of the event is to give an opportunity to the European Nuclear Safety Authority regulators and their technical support organizations, as well as other stakeholders, to exchange experiences and views on the achievements and challenges in nuclear safety in the EU and globally. And the director of Slovenia Nuclear Safety Administration, Igor, and he was at the International Atomic Energy Agency's nuclear conference earlier in the year. Remember that? We covered it. We played videos of each one of them where they're saying, we need nuclear for climate change. Addressing the challenge. Well, nuclear is climate change. It's a hard concept, I would imagine, for the average person to appreciate, but I have a really neat way of explaining it. So think of a nuclear accident like Fukushima. This is a model of the Fukushima radioactive fallout. And you notice everything you see coming out over there is Japan, but notice how the emissions slowly disappear because the whole planet starts to be covered, but the emissions never go away. And so you have this entire planet, and this is in 31 days, the entire planet covered in radioactive fallout. And a pulsing energy, each atom is think of a snowflake, but instead you can't see it, it's an atom, but think of it as a snowflake where you can see it. So imagine if you had a snowstorm that started in Fukushima, and after 31 days the whole planet was covered in a snowstorm, it never stopped snowing and the snow never melted. That's radioactive fallout. And on top of that, each snowflake is pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second, which destroys your chromosomes, the DNA, the cells in insects and birds and mammals and animals, and trees and plants and biota and everything else. And you can't perceive it. You can't see it or smell it or hear it or taste it or touch it or feel it or anything like that. It's so wicked. It's just, and I can understand why the average person doesn't understand. It's a very complicated story if you don't find someone like me that is going to articulate it for you. But nobody has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And so it really is a plague. A PhD historian breaks down how anti-nuclear movement drastically impacted the global energy sector. Nuclear energy is the most misunderstood. So this is a PhD historian. This is not a nuclear scientist. He knows nothing about nuclear. But yet, and you can tell every time you see one of these people what's really going on with them. Calling it a carbon-free source, how do you quantify that assertion? You can't. Has explained how the anti-nuclear movement set back the global green energy sector. It's the opposite. The nuclear industry has destroyed, literally scuttled the renewable industry. Right? Whatever they're telling you is they're projecting is what they're actually up to, right? They're projecting it back and saying that the industry is doing it to them, the renewables, instead they're doing it to the renewables. There's a video about nuclear energy with almost 600 comments on TikTok because of the ongoing debate about the benefits of nuclear energy, but there is no benefits. Nobody on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. There's no insects. There's nothing with replicating cells that has an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. The feds pick a new company for $8 million a hand for nuclear site work, replacing a 15-year contractor. Yeah, because they usually get huge multi-million-dollar bonuses each year. They just wanted to retire, see? And this stupid get-up she got on, look at both of these with Geiger counters in their hands. And the reality of it is, though, is that if you worked at Hanford in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, for a single 8-hour shift, you're entitled to a permanent pension or a large payout up to $150,000 and health care. And you don't have to prove you got sick there. You just got to prove you worked there for a single 8-hour shift. And so what they do is they have contractors, and the contractors are not going to get those particular attributes, right? They have another system for, and a lot of these contractors are hiring temporary workers, very vulnerable people in the societies. And so like an educated person, a nuclear scientist, that's not going to be a nuclear scientist in that get up with a Geiger counter in their hand. There's zero possibility that they're going to Hanford or any other place like that and get gamma shines and neutron bombardments and beta rays and x-rays. It's zero possibility. But they'll be happy to put your children, your loved ones there and have it happen to them, I can tell you that much. Global nuclear arms spending hit $173,000 a minute. There's 9,000 facets to nuclear, and all of them needs enormous amount of resources, enormous amounts of academics, enormous, just absurd amounts of money to be functional. War shows no sign of abating. 170, well, that's, who do you think is all the money's going to? Is going to the war machine. The radioactive fallout from nuclear tests is the same radioactive fallout from a nuclear war. You already had nuclear wars. The Soviet Union's biggest bomb was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at one time. So if two countries fire 1,900 Nagasaki bombs each, is that not a nuclear war? Is that not radioactive fallout? This is an industry that has done incredible jobs hoodwinking everybody, manipulating everything and everybody perpetually. So, but you're talking about $91 billion in 2023 just on nuclear weapons. Like, this is literally nothing. This is equivalent to pissing on a forest fire. It's the amount of money that they throw at nuclear every year worldwide is just, how can you have a future with nuclear on your planet is the best way to think about it. Well, for that kind of money, you can buy 526,000 people a big, beautiful home, completely paid for, each year. Or you can buy 1 million people a decent home, completely paid for each year, just for that alone. And then multiply that by 10 to get just what the American military is going to spend on nuclear over the next number of years. The amount of money they throw away, and not only that, like that kind of money, $91 billion, you got any idea how much geothermal you can build in your country with that kind of money? Like, it's unbelievable. You can solve all your problems in just a few years with those resources. And then the precious metal that goes into the weapon that can never be recovered and reused again is truly one of the most disturbing facets of the story. And it's not an accident. Spiked by 14% in 2023, with the United States leading and holding a 56% share of all nuclear weapons. And the state could spend a colossal $51 billion, an 18% rise in nuclear acquisitions, widening the gap between it. And the second largest spender, China, was spent over $11.4 billion. And Russia scooped to third place. What a way to frame that narrative, isn't it? With nuclear spending $8.3 billion. And the disgusting United Kingdom, nuclear industry in the United Kingdom is despicable. I can't say it enough how disgusting the United Kingdom and Australia nuclear industries actually are. Like you got to live it like we do, 7 days a week, to really understand these are just not even subhuman people. They got none of the attributes of a human whatsoever. Projects over $100 billion will be used in more acquisitions by the end of 2024. Nuclear lobbying is on the rise. $387 billion with companies that manufacture nuclear weapons. They're the same company making just normal weapons. They're the same companies that are making all the other weapons. And they will, and the people that invest in these, of course, they're on the stock market, so you can't hold them accountable, right? You can't put anybody in jail because they're on the stock market. And then they invest in themselves because they know the government is going to be robbed in every country that they can creep into. And Australia is next. And Australia ain't the only one that they're going to rob in 2024, I can tell you that much. And it never stops after, right? Moreover, $123 million was spent hiring more than 540 extra nuclear lobbyists and funding think tanks influencing the nuclear debate. So you have these, this is what the nuclearproctologist.org is we're a think tank. We're anti-nuclear think tank, and we're anti-nuclear and space think tank too, because it's not natural. It's called man-made because it's not from the solar system. We have no right to introduce it into the solar system. And we have the responsibility not to put it in the solar system. So moreover, over $123 million was spent hiring more than 540 lobbyists and funding think tanks that are like the Breakthrough Institute, for instance. They got $18 million last year. Just that one think tank. But when you do the numbers on it, it works out to $227,000 per lobbyist. If you gave a lobbyist $227,000, there's probably nobody's throat after they won't cut. And they get to cut your throat every year, don't they? This is a crazy story. Red faces for Sellafield and the nuclear decommission authorities as their lawyers are slammed by a judge. She was prosecuted. Unbelievable. Alison McDermott. Sellafield and the Nuclear Decommission Authority were all but humiliated in a court judgment in their second attempt to get cast against the whistleblower human resource consultant Alison McDermott. We've covered this quite a lot over the last couple of years. For exposing bullying, now it has finally been dismissed, the case has, and alleged sexual harassment at the plant. The Nuclear Decommission Authority in Sellafield failed entirely to get any cost for its main contentions that Miss McDermott had acted unreasonably throughout the case. Defending yourself now is considered unreasonable, apparently. The only award for cost was $5,000. It took them $1 million. They spent $1 million to get $5,000. Shared between Sellafield and Heather Roberts, Sellafield's human resource director, where the tribunal believed Ms. Dermott had been unreasonable in alleging crucial metadata was tampered with. Well, if you throw enough turds at the wall, something will stick, right? The long-running case has cost the taxpayer around 1 million sterlings. Is it sterlings in the United Kingdom, I believe? To bring through the tribunal system. The last cost hearing alone landed Sellafield, which is a nuclear reprocessing site, just a disgusting legacy, surrounded by farms. and the NDA with a $100,000 bill for the taxpayers just to recover $5,000. Well, it can be argued, and it has been successfully argued, that they spent $1 million, $1 million sterlings, to get $5,000. Her finding in her report commissioned by the Sellafield itself has made national news in the United Kingdom and Norway because it raises nuclear safety issues. Judge Robinson was critical of the two barristers acting for Sellafield and the NDA in the way they handled the case. This is one of them. And my goodness, what she done was just brutal. And she makes, I think it was $3,000 a day. Did he mention it here? Yeah, $3,000 a day. He found Rachel Levine, who acted for the NDA, failed to produce any substantive arguments that Mr. Mont should meet the $20,000 of the cost. The $3,000 a day barrister tried to argue that Mr. Mont was misconceived in bringing the case, had lied in her evidence, and deliberately exaggerated her evidence throughout the proceedings. And this was rejected by the judge. And she put forward 6 allegations against her, which were all rejected for not being specific enough. Well, she's a lawyer who's charging a huge amount of money and couldn't make her claims, right? She made no specific case about the unreasonableness of the claimant's complaint. She makes no case that any specific application for disclosure against the second respondent was unreasonable. She makes no case as to why the applications to strike out the second respondent's response based on failures in disclosure was unreasonable. And she does not explain in what specific ways she contends that the claimant's amendments to her claims were unreasonable. In other words, she just took the money and ran. $3,000 a day, or 3,000 sterlings, which is a lot more than 3,000, isn't it? The judge also accepts that Ms. Dermott was right to turn down an offer of $160,000. They offered her $160,000 to drop the case for the NDA, which Ms. Levine tried to make as an example of unreasonableness. She wouldn't take the money, so that was considered unreasonable. And that's what I mean. Like, the nuclear industry has this endless barrage of monsters to work for them. She stood her ground. She was under siege for several years. She was violently smeared. She was painted. And she was harassed, literally, in every sense of the word, figuratively, in every sense of the word. Judge Robinson was also critical of the Sellafield barrister, Mr. Despal Pansir. I'll butcher some of people's names, my apologies. From the Old Square Chambers, who also attacked Miss Dermott for being fundamentally dishonest, only using more extravagant and denigrating language. And that's this creature right there. The judge ruled that the tribunal were not persuaded by the lawyer's assertions and that the claimant's allegations were particularly serious because of the standing of the individuals about whom they were made. So because they were very high standing in the community or the nuclear industry, they were considered untouchable. Truly revolting, yeah? Very important people. Just because they're important don't mean they can't be a criminal. Judge Philip Lancaster's attitude towards women is also under fire as he's facing complaints from women who have been appeared before him on previous employment tribunal hearings. Nothing surprises me when it comes to the United Kingdom. The reality of it is the bigotry and the bias and the prejudice and the racism is blatant constantly, isn't it? This was the second time the Sellafield and NDA tried to get cost from her. Like, what they done is just disgusting. Even after a high court EAT judge had already ruled that the costs imposed at a previous hearing were unsafe, so the nuclear body should have known they had little chance of success, as it is the money they have recovered is not even enough to pay for a single day of Mr. Panasir's charges, which runs at $5,500 a day. He charges $5,500 a day for the nuclear industry, to work for the nuclear industry. So he's really good at screwing over the victims, I would imagine. The metadata included criticism of Miss McDermott had been produced at the home computers of Sellafield staff, of all things and places, putting at risk the security of the nuclear plant. And a complaint to the Information Commissioner's Office led to the criminal prosecution of Sellafield, and it was found guilty this week of that. It reeks of retaliating against the victims. In positions of authority, very important people able to use incredible resources and lawyers and barristers and legal systems to destroy them until they usually give up and go away. But in this case, the victims stood their ground. Even when they were offered $160,000 to run away, they refused to because they had the moral compass not to. The hubris of the directors, frankly, the whole proceedings against Miss Dermont by Sellafield, which is a disgusting disease factory, and the NDA shows the hubris of the directors of both organizations. The lawyers must have been encouraged to over-egg their case against her, leading the judge to throw it out. Any sensible organization, already warned by another judge that the costs were unsafe, would have a cause to think again. Instead, they plowed ahead because they knew the taxpayers would foot the million sterling bill. Surreal, isn't it? But this is what we expect from the nuclear industry. It's really the only thing they're good at is being scumbags. And surprisingly, they lost because normally they excel at this. I also think this was a deliberate ploy to cause more distress to Miss Dermont because they hated her finding about the way the nuclear waste plant was run. And it may also be aimed at frightening anybody wanting to raise issues like sexual harassment, bullying, and nuclear safety. And this is not a good place for any business, let alone one dealing with such dangerous material as nuclear waste. Well said. Hear, hear. What you're seeing is retaliatory, just unbelievable. In the positions of authority to do it, and so they done it. They hired lawyers at exorbitant rates, the best they could find, and they still lost. And they don't care. They couldn't care less. This is the strangest story. United Kingdom never lets us, or Australia never lets us down. And it's very difficult to draw a line between Australia and United Kingdom, right? Because they're so interconnected. Good and evil reactors. This is a really important story, if I remember correctly, or the next story. Strategic analyst, Australia Director Michael Shoebridge says the Albanese government is causing itself huge headaches over nuclear power. Labour's stance on nuclear has raised concerns for the future of the AUKUS, which is the nuclear subs, as they push for nuclear subs but continue to ban nuclear energy on land. Oh yeah, they're only going to get worse if they continue this strange line that there's good nuclear reactors and evil nuclear reactors. So they're saying that how can you accept nuclear submarines but not accept nuclear reactors? First off, nuclear submarines are somewhere else most of the time. And the nuclear power plants, you're going to take the fuel out of the reactor core, put it in the pool. The pool is now going to hemorrhage radiation into the communities, into the country, into the fresh air and the fresh water. And they're typically surrounded by farms for their entire legacy. And that radiation never goes away. You don't need a meltdown to poison the entire population. You just need a fuel pool. And they know the difference. Anti-nuclear alarmists. And I was really a little bit shocked whenever I see these people, this contempt that you see in these people. Just unbelievable contempt for everybody. And this presenter, these people, they literally scare me. If the debate goes well, we could have a much better informed public. If the propaganda works, they can have a much better complacent public, is more like it. Or it could run off the rails and get out of hand and potentially impact the submarine fantasies. Concerns over divisive nuclear rhetoric risk to submarines. Anti-nuclear alarmists. Anybody that has any criticism is an alarmist. Anybody that has legitimate concerns is an alarmist. Anybody that don't go along with whatever their memo of the day is an alarmist. That's the most dangerous narratives conceivable. There's no open debates. They bring in the old sawhorses for the industry. And that presenter over there was disgusting. Peter Dutton says nuclear power plants burn energy. No, they don't. Now, this story is so important to the big picture. Just bear with me. I want to be able to... I want to copy that and put somewhere where I can find it later. This is a great story. Let me go backwards here. All right, so it's clear Peter Dutton doesn't know anything about nuclear. He thinks they burn fuel or energy. And this is such an important story. Let me get this sorted out. Opposition leader betrayed his complete ignorance about the nuclear technology he threatens to impose on the Australian population by making a fundamental error. He thinks they burn fuel or energy. Mr. Dutton, it's on relevance and perhaps to be of assistance to the minister. The propulsion system burns energy. That's how the system is working, and it's stored in the speaker says resume your seat, and he said actually they don't burn fuel. That's the point of them. If they did, they would likely create emissions. So this is how they trick people where they say it's carbon free. This is the narrative that they're using for that particular trick. They don't burn fuel. That's the point of them. If they did, they would likely create emissions. Now the thing is, they create emissions by splitting atoms. And these atoms are toxic to everything with replicating cells forever. There's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. But while they're in the reactor, they're semi-contained. They can still get out, as we see with the CANDU reactors in Canada. Is a prime example. But after about 14 months, you take out a large part of the reactor and you put it in a fuel pool. There's no containment. So it's still splitting those atoms, and they're released directly into the ecosystem. That's an emission. And you could, just because you can't see it or perceive it, or smell it, or taste it, or hear it, or feel it, or touch it, or anything, that doesn't mean that that's not real. It's not tangible. It's very toxic to everything with replicating cells, and it never stops producing it. It's a perpetual machine. So the fuel, when it comes out of the reactor, goes into the fuel pool, has no containment. It's in water. The water boils off about 120,000 liters a day, and each liter is going to be utterly saturated with these deadly, lethal radioactive isotopes. And they're released into the system. They boil off, they go up the tall, skinny stacks, and they disperse. And some of it circles the planet, lots of it ends up into your water tables, absolutely into your food supply, because they're typically surrounded by farms. These are emissions. And these are easy to measure with equipment. And this is the hidden secret of nuclear, by the way. Mr. Marley says actually it doesn't burn any fuel because burning is oxidization, which is what happens in an internal combustion engine, which is true, that part, which is exactly what happens when you use hydrocarbons. And what this is a nuclear reaction which gives rise to power. But how does it give rise to power? You can't just it's not like a nuclear, like someone in a waving a wand and all of a sudden there's energy. There's all these atoms are being created perpetually, once you start that chain reaction, you can never turn it off. You can turn it off and take the reactor fuel out, but the fuel is still now producing atoms, perpetual atoms. And the numbers we're talking about are the most terrifying thing conceivable. And you can't get rid of it. You can't burn it. You can't destroy it. So what this is, a nuclear reaction which gives rise to power, that is what happens inside a sealed nuclear reactor. The point is that the waste that will be needed to be disposed of, and then it just drops off right there. And if we don't accept Labour's word on it, the opposition leader could also read up on the website of the Nuclear Energy Institute, which are perpetual lawyers. And nuclear plants are different because they do not burn anything to create steam, which is, first off, you can't have a nuclear plant without 2 dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants. And you're going to boil 1 million gallons of water a minute. Typically, a glass of salt water would have 1 billion creatures in it. And 75 to 100 million of them are the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain. And then there's 1 billion creatures in each glass of water. There's 16 million glasses. So 16 million times 1 billion creatures are being boiled every second to power 1 million homes, or every minute to power 1 million homes. So the cause and effect is actually significant. And by destroying all these little creatures, you're producing emissions on top of that through that venue too. Do not release carbon or pollutants like nitrogen or sulfur oxides into the air. So, but it does release, once you put it in the fuel pool, uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and the list goes on and on and on. And this stuff never goes away. And it attacks everything with replicating cells forever. So that's one of the rare times we've seen him actually come out and articulate the difference between nuclear and hydrocarbons, like gasoline or diesel or coal or something, right? Which doesn't cause climate change because it doesn't travel very far and is assimilated back into plants and trees, because you can't have plants and trees or humans without carbon. And let's explain carbon, the real fundamental of carbon. Let's just go down that road right quick. There's a short video in Congress where he asked the politicians how much carbon is in the atmosphere. And I think the answer is pretty amazing. So I got to artificially turn it up in here. Just bear with me. I got to remember to turn it down after. So let's play this clip where these politicians who are in charge of climate change are asked for their opinion about carbon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Panelists, let me just go right down the line real fast. What % of our atmosphere is CO2? Take your best guess. You don't have to be accurate. All down the line.
Repeat that question.
What % of our atmosphere is CO2, carbon dioxide? Wild guess, it's okay.
I'll bite 5%.
5?
I'll just follow you then.
We'll go 7. That's my favorite number.
I'll see their 5 and suggest that we know that transportation causes 49% of CO2, so that's why we're all working on energy transition.
All right. So what number do you think it is?
5.
5? How about you? I didn't hear you, Mr. Dreher.
7.
7. Did you have one, Mr. Boyd?
So we got a 5, 7,
This Price is Right.
8. I'm going to
Okay.
get the high end.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and I don't mean to put you on ice. I ask a lot of people that because all we hear is climate change, CO2, CO2. I heard a couple of you on the panel saying you're looking to change your vehicles to electric, even though we don't have the electric grid. And me as a farmer, I wouldn't be real happy about running out and replacing $300,000, $500,000, $1 million pieces of equipment because someone wants it to be electric. The answer is 0.04%. Not 1%, not a half of a percent. It's 0.04%, and it's gone up from 0.03 over the last couple decades. This is what we're being all contorted into doing, is this tiny change in CO2. If we get below 0.02, plant life starts dying off.
0.04%, 0.0. So it's 4/100ths%. If it gets down to 0.02%, 0.02%, plants won't grow. We need more carbon. So what's causing the so-called, and there is climate change, and it's 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. But Japan was a pulse event, a very, very terrible pulse event. And the whole planet was a perpetual snowstorm of invisible radioactive fallout. And that is invisible snowstorm that's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. It's been going on for 80 years, all the nuclear testing, all the nuclear dumping, and for the average person, they can't begin to comprehend the enormity of that statement, the horror of that statement, but just what they dumped into the oceans, not counting everything else, is just, like Hanford dumped they admit to it too, 450 billion gallons of sludge directly into the soil. And I always get a blank stare when I used to say that. And so then I done the math for people to give them a visual of what that actually means. It's equal to a wall 6 feet, or aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Where a single liter, everybody walks past that stuff would die that day for 1 million years. So imagine a wall 6 feet thick, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet, dumped directly into the soil at Hanford, right alongside the Columbian River, no doubt, on top of that. Who knows what India's done, what China's done, what Pakistan has done, what Russia, or what the USSR had done, what Israel or Canada or anybody else has done. I can guarantee you it's not good. And we know, it's not just Hanford, all the national laboratories in the United States, which are huge facilities, all of them built on massive aquifers in the corresponding parts of their country. It's catastrophic. The only way to describe the nuclear industry, the only way you can accurately describe the nuclear industry is as a death cult. It's an unbelievable death cult, actually. I apologize, everybody. I went early. We went live early tonight. I'm still not on my A game. I've had a tough week. A real tough day on top of that. And I just decided if I don't do the show, I'm not going to get it done tonight. And so I'm doing the show. And I put a lot of work into this show. And I doubt highly we'll get through it all. I'm trying. But I'm not any good at rushing through this stuff because the details, the minutiae, is so important. That you got to treat it with the respect it deserves, right? Like nitrogen and sulfur oxide into the air. Yeah, but nuclear hemorrhages radiation into the ecosystem 24 hours a day. All nuclear does. Splitting atoms. That's the problem with it. And there's no way to contain that, see? So it's not really supposed to exist. It's not the only major misunderstanding of nuclear by Dutton. Again, right? They use Dutton now to cover up crimes against humanity and omnicide. He has suggested that what he defines as a small nuclear reactor, which is 400 megawatts, these are not small modular reactors. Again, now they're framing a narrative so that people now believes that a small modular reactor is 400 megawatts. There's lots of large reactors out there. That's what they're putting out, is around 400 megawatts. Right, so they're moving the goalpost in this story. It's really interesting. Whoever wrote the story obviously are very clever, very well aware of how the propaganda should work, and are able to maneuver these narratives to indoctrinate the population into things that are simply not true. Like, and so this is, whoever's doing it is a very thoughtful person for the nuclear industry. They're very used to deceiving people, and would produce just a single can of Coke as waste, which was Jeffrey Goldblum's narrative, right? And he wrote a book and produced a documentary, a pro-nuclear documentary with a popular movie maker. I can't remember his name. But we've challenged that narrative. And the narrative was everybody can have, and we've seen Taiwan do the same thing, the same kind of narrative where they say nuclear produces so little waste that everybody can, if everybody had a Coke can size of nuclear waste, then there wouldn't be any nuclear waste. But the problem is that if you took a can of this, Coke can of this nuclear waste, because that's what they're talking about, the high level waste, everybody that walked past my house would die within a day or two for thousands and millions of years. So imagine if every household had a can there, everybody would be dead that day worldwide. But the high level waste, for instance, that Hanford dumped is the same kind of toxicity, and that was equal to an aquarium of lethal nuclear sludge by the liter that happened to be 450 billion gallons of it, is equal to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once, with no containment anywhere. Like, it's unfair that they had done this to our planet, this single industry. It's unconscionable, it's inconceivable, it's everything else, but it's unfair that they done that. They don't have a right to destroy the future of this planet and the species. Nobody has a right to do that. This nuclear industry, they have demonstrated they feel they have that right. And they don't need a nuclear war, even though they've had many of them. You call them nuclear testing, that's a nuclear war. It's a horrifying, it's a revolting, it's a despicable industry in every sense of the word. And Emeritus Professor of Griffith University School of Environment and Science, whenever you hear that, run the other way immediately. That's what the word professor means, is somebody you shouldn't trust. There's a couple out there that you can, but you can't take the chance. 99.9% of professors are the ones who are going to cut your throat. They'll do it with the stroke of a pen, 1 million people at a time. Said it was safe to say a small modular reactor would generate many tons of waste per year, and it was likely that the waste would be more radioactive than the waste from a large-scale reactor. The small modular reactors, and 400 megawatts is not small, that's a large reactor, by the way. Don't fall for that lie. But the studies on the small modular reactors were out of Canada, the original ones, the accurate ones. And they were shown it was 35% more intermediate level waste, because you have to use a very high grade, weapons grade fuel, a mixed plutonium mixed oxide fuel. It was 30% more high level waste, like lethal level waste, and it's 5 times more fuel rods. And the fuel rods are the ones that are splitting atoms and are lethal on a whole different scale. But they're also the ones that are splitting atoms. And a lot of the high-level waste certainly is still splitting atoms too, right? But yeah, in comparison, when you scale it up to the size of a large reactor, that's what the findings are clearly shown. And speculation is going to be infinitely worse than that, because you got to take into accountability that you're talking about plutonium mixed oxide fuel. This stuff has already gone through a chain reaction. And so if you put it through a chain reaction again, the atoms, once you take it out and put it in a pool, the emissions from the fuel pools are shockingly terrifying. There's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger that can any hope at all of defending against that, let alone the typical fuel. So calling a 400 megawatts, which is a massive facility, a small modular reactor, you got to be pretty clever to slip that in the way they done. Only a well-seasoned monster would have done that. So whoever got their name on this story clearly didn't write the story. They put their name on it. Somebody else in the nuclear industry wrote it. You expect that to produce about 6 tons of waste a year. In a 400 megawatt reactor, it's going to be a hell of a lot more than that. It's insane to suggest it's only going to be 6 tons, which is still a terrifying amount. They run on highly enriched uraniums, high assay, plutonium mixed oxide fuel is what they're going to be running on. Weapons grade, military grade, and produce a much nastier, much more intractable set of radioactive waste elements that have to be treated. You can't treat them. Right? And so whoever wrote this article is an expert, and they don't work for that newspaper, I can tell you that. Whoever put their name on the article is an expert scumbag. The coalition's entire nuclear push is based on lies and misconception. Everything in the story is lies and misconceptions and deceit and dishonesty. Their entire legacy is predicated upon this routine. Perhaps Dutton needs to watch a few more episodes of Simpsons. And that's quite the insult, because whoever wrote the article probably writes for the Simpsons. They're that diabolical. Whoever wrote the article should be in jail. They're clearly a psychopath, a sociopath. They're clearly insane, and they have nothing but contempt for humanity and the 8 million species. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. Prime Minister quizzed about nuclear, as it happens, abc.net.australia. It's a perpetual barrage of Australia pro-nuclear media. It's a media blitz we've never seen the likes of. It's like day 7, I believe. Meanwhile, Greens leader Adam Bandt has confirmed that one minor party will move a motion to recognize Palestine. Didn't see that one coming. Dottenheimer. That was hilarious when I first seen that one today. Queensland protesters lashes to LNP's nuclear plan. Dottenheimer. Just call him what he is, monster. Environmental groups and union members joined concerned citizens at the Albion office to lash the nuclear plan, dubbing the federal opposition leader Dottenheimer. It's still pretty cool. I like it. Mr. Dottenheimer pledged on June 19 to build 7 nuclear disease factories across 5 states on the site of coal-fired power stations if elected, which is what quasi-electric is going to do with geothermal. I'm starting to rub my eye again. Mr. Dutton pledged on June 19 to build 7 nuclear disease factories / nuclear power plants across 5 states on the sites of coal-fired power stations if elected. Queensland's Conservation Council's Paul Sperum said First Nations communities have not been consulted on nuclear energy plants, sparking fears about its impact on the environment and the people. We had Maralinga, the Edmonds Fields, the Montebellos. So I'm proud and fortunate enough to meet a lot of old people that were affected by those blasts in Australia. And a lot of the following generations after those old people are still suffering from nuclear damage. And bless their hearts, at least the power we can't afford, nuclear. Thank goodness somebody got out there, right? Duttenheimer and queried why nuclear was now suddenly a priority. If they wanted nuclear power, they could have done it when they were in power for 10 years, which we made that argument last night, right? You know, they were in power for 10 years. And now they feel the only way they can get back in power is if they go nuclear. That's a really interesting switch, isn't it? Queensland says no to nuclear. It's terrifying that the people got to come out and do that, because everybody that they elect turns out to be the most corrupt person they've ever elected every single time. They're more corrupt than the last one, and the next one is more corrupt than that one, and the next one is more corrupt than that one. It's an abusive cycle, isn't it? Mr. Dutton is yet to reveal the costs associated with his nuclear plant, and harnessing the energy sources would require changes to the federal state legislation. And wherever you're going to put these nuclear power plants, the people got to be able to get out of there in 20 minutes. You got to build all kinds of highways and freeways to get them out of the radioactive fallout zones. Like the whole list, you're talking $600 billion when you finally put all the infrastructure into place, at least. In Queensland, nuclear energy is banned under the Nuclear Facilities Prohibition Act of 2007, right? Under the Mineral Council in Australia is one of the biggest pushers for nuclear, by the way, which we've covered I don't know how many times over the years. Not recently, though, I noticed in the last year or two. But I was really a little bit shocked over the last 6-7 days of this bombardment of Australia. It took me a couple of days to try to wrap my mind around it. I didn't really take it serious for the first couple of days, believe it or not, which is clearly not like me, but we're talking about Australia. And Australia is notorious for the exorbitant mouthpieces that they got down there. They're such scumbags, I'd rather not read their stories. It's always just nonsense. But it's terrifying nonsense because it's gibberish is the best way to describe it, I think. And I come to the realization after sitting around and pondering it that I better get my ass in gear and start gathering this up and figuring out what the hell is going down. And so that first day I was like, oh crap, I got it all of a sudden. Like I woke up in the morning and said, oh shit, that's a media blitz. And I woke up and I went out and I started opening up pages and everything was Australia nuclear. And I was like, how the hell did I miss this? Like really, how did I miss it? I think I just wanted it to go away. I was trying to wish it away, like, because we've dealt with Australia a lot, and they're always the rudest, the most sadistic and twisted people you'll ever come across. And I've said every time it comes up in a conversation, which is quite often, multiple times every week, I'll always say they're the worst. Them and the British. Don't get me wrong, Canada's brutal, okay? But I'm from Canada. And what the British does, though, their narratives and the Australian narratives, like, they remind me of, like, 4th graders, 5th graders. Like, where they're pretty good. They can talk up a storm, They can use a lot of decent little words, and they're clearly not mature. They're clearly children. You don't need to hear their voices. You just got to read their transcript. You say, well, that's kids, right? And that's the same thing we see with British and particularly Australia. If you're just reading the highlights and you're not getting, if someone passes you a script and it has that narrative, you're going to say, well, that's 4th and 5th graders. Right? They're able to kind of articulate things, but right away this is very childish stuff, right? The narratives, the banter, everything is really childish. I'm sorry, childlike, not even childish. It's childlike. And I dislike them. After all these years, I honestly dislike the Australian nuclear industry and the British nuclear industry. I disrespect them. And once I disrespect anything, then there's only one reason I'm like that, is because they've demonstrated that their contempt is leaps and bounds above the typical scumbag. So the Nuclear Facility Prohibition Act of 2007 in Australia forbids the construction operation of nuclear reactors and other facilities in the nuclear fuel cycle. Ah, yes. Officials to conduct a simulated emergency exercise at the Prairie Island nuclear plant I actually got a lot of fantastic stories tonight, don't I? If you go, and then I can't get them all under my video, but if you look under my video at the stories we're covering tonight, there's a lot of crazy stories. A lot of the crazies are out there today. Officials that conduct simulated emergency exercise at Prairie Island Nuclear Disease Factory. A nuclear power plant is a disease factory, right? They're perpetually releasing emissions that causes diseases. Your biggest nightmare is a nuclear power plant. The fuel pools is your number one enemy on the planet. Bar everything else, bar nothing, rather. The biggest contributor to heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, the list is very long, is emissions from a nuclear power plant. After Fukushima, the obesity rates almost doubled in the first year, for instance, in Japan, and which is a marker for radiation brain damage, obesity. Cancer rates, there was in Japan was 865,000 extra cancers in 2012. That's 1 year later. They stopped releasing the statistics after that, mind you, because I got hold of that. I found that, and I was like, oh, goodness. Not everybody got health care. Not everybody's diagnosed. And that's a stunning revelation, right? 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. When it comes to children, there was a study in 2019 where 14.2% of 100,000 neonates and infants needed open heart surgery to correct congenital malformation across the entire country, which is 14,200 out of 100,000 children. It's not like 14.2% more than it was before. It was 14.2% of 100,000 live births needed open heart surgery. There's another study of 6 in 10 Fukushima children in 2012 with diabetes. There's another study, multiple studies, of thyroid tumors of 2 centimeters or larger in 13,646 children out of 38,000. When the rate of thyroid tumors was 1 to 2 per million before Fukushima. And post-Fukushima was 38.7%. So when you scale it up, it's 387,000 of a million, with tumors of 2 centimeters or bigger, and the thyroid glands of an adult are only 3 by 5 centimeters. A child's tumor thyroid is about 2 by 1.5 centimeters. So 2 centimeters, that's a huge tumor. And what it means, though, also, is that the thyroid now is producing radioactive hormones. And that's forever. Not only that, in order for that to happen, you're going to have a radiated skeleton too. So the developing children not only got radioactive hormones to deal with, they got radioactive stem cells to deal with. And this is why you see the species decline exponentially, significantly, horrifyingly post-Fukushima. And we've done research expeditions for 6 years in the Pacific Ocean, 4 to 5 months a year, that clearly show an extinction level event. And we're seeing the same thing on the East Coast. And I'm always a little bit shocked because I meet a lot of people and they can't comprehend it. Because they're been propagandized so much. The only thing they can say is climate change. They don't have a concept of what it is or where it came. Which climate change, of course, was a propaganda machine from NASA, of all places. NASA is the reason that we heard the word climate change everywhere constantly. James Hansen was one of the biggest perpetrators of that misdirection and misinformation. Like, there's so much darkness going on, when you look at the nuclear industry, what I got to start doing is just once a week coming in, and we're going to do a show where I'm not going to have any headlines. Just going to sit there and talk for 2 hours and take you down the rabbit holes, because there's so many rabbit holes. And like we cover it a lot of times in the news cycle, but when you're just abstracting and postulating, because I don't really do that. I don't really do conjectures or opinions, right? Because there's no need to. The industry is so terrifying, so horrifying. But we really should do that. Because nobody's ever done it to them, right? So we really do need that contextual input in order to open up people's eyes, I do believe, including the perpetrators themselves. Because they're so used to the yes men. They're not used to... When they come here and they read your comments, or they know, a lot of us, right? They're aware of us. They're terrified of that. They're literally mortified that somebody would have a conversation about the facts, about the truth, about the documentation, show the documentation for their assertions. Because that's all we really do, right? We just deal in facts. And you're forced to do that. You can't even have a Freudian slip when you're talking about this subject. You're going to be 100% accurate. And the enormous stress, the unbelievable stress of always having to be perfectly correct and perfectly honest is very difficult for anybody to handle, I can imagine, because it's so hard on me. But I've been at this a very long time. But I understand that if I try to carry on, they'll clip that out, and down the road they'll have a whole string of this stuff, and they say, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about," and they'll use that to bludgeon opposition with on top of that. Rate of disproportion. People near the Prairie Island nuclear plant see an emergency responder presence in the area during the exercise. They got to put that out there because they're going to have people terrified. And anybody that lives in that area and can see this should sell their homes and move out of there. Please try to sell it to the pro-nuclear community first. According to the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, if you're an actual Department of Public Safety and you don't run away screaming, you're not a Department of Safety. The purpose of the annual exercise, is to test the capabilities, this is the most insane statement imaginable, of the federal, state, and local agencies in the event of an incident at the plant. There's nothing you can do. If there's a nuclear meltdown, you can't fix that. You can't resolve that. You can't mitigate it. You run away. That's what nuclear scientists does. Like they don't have like fire extinguishers at nuclear plants. They have those containers, those glasses, built into the wall, but they're sneakers. And so you pull on your sneakers, get rid of your work boots, and run away as quick as you can. And I kind of blocked out the list of the places. You can see it in the bottom over there. I actually put it in the description, all of these places. That's probably why I got no views tonight, is because I have so much information in the description. Nuclear energy is too costly for Australia. Sky News. Sky News is all over the place, eh? They'll play both sides of the table. And as soon as you turn your back and relax, they'll put a gun in the back of your head and pull the trigger, right? Australia doesn't have enough time to wait for the coalition's nuclear policy to come online. They're all over the place, eh? Here they're anti-nuclear this time. That's to drag you in, and then they'll brainwash you like the other stories I showed you earlier. It's too costly, it takes too long, and it means people's power bills will go up. I was actually shocked to see Sky News say that. Duttenheimer's nuclear dead cat. It's a distraction because Duttenheimer has no chance of winning the next election. And even if he did, he would never be able to get his dangerous plan through the Senate. According to Duttenheimer, he's just going to ram it through. Now, don't underestimate these people. If they got the nuclear industry backing them, and they do, they'll get it through. And when you put the two of them together, Albanese, the dictator, like calling him a Nazi still doesn't do it justice. He's a lunatic, right? This guy is an actual lunatic. He wants total censorship on the Australian people. He shouldn't be allowed to see anything that he and his staff doesn't okay first on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere else. And like I got the videos of him saying it. It's not surreal that the Australians are too simple-minded to be allowed to see things on their own. This is what you get with a whole lot of friggin' inbreeding, see? The coalition's nuclear policy may have been a projection of an internal politics outwards, but the means of selling it was a cultural war. Again, it's a circus. Whenever the word nuclear comes up in Australia or United Kingdom, there's a circus that goes with it. And it has all the bells and whistles, and the crazies are always in charge. Then Dutton went and called albanese a child in a man's body, which ruined it. No, it's true. Albanese is a child in a man's body. And if you see the videos that I actually got on this guy here and his staff, that's the only conclusion you can draw. Is these people are crazy. I mean, like they're so power hungry, and once they got the power, they're maniacs. That's like, I use the word monster a lot because we're talking about nuclear, and that's the appropriate word. It's really something. It's a spectacle, to say the least. Trouble is, once you say that or anything like it, you become the whiny, needy one. And was Dutton feeling the pressure? Like, but all the media in Australia, that is how they act. That is their typical everyday routine. Congress passes an Advance Act to accelerate deployment of advanced nuclear reactors. That was a few days ago, right? And this new act is to give them endless monies, endless resources, endless permissions, to get rid of any rules and red tapes and any kind of... And there's no way that they're going to be able to produce any reactors. They're going to get rid of all the issues that they have, and they still won't be able to produce any reactors. The Senate approved a House amendment to the bill with a vote of 88-2, and was only opposed by Senators Markey and Sanders. Everybody else voted. It was a bipartisan vote. Everybody voted for the bill on both sides, except for 2 senators. Its passage reflects strong bipartisan support for promoting advanced nuclear reactors. There is no advanced nuclear reactors. You don't have any licenses into the regulatory agencies, let alone a license. You can't build it without a license. And the whole process for license is exorbitant. It's 5, 10, 15 years. And then you got to build a test reactor on one of the national laboratory sites probably. And that's another, 5, 10 years to get the kinks out of all of that. You got to run it. You got to run it hard. You got to get it run first, and you got to slowly bring the power up over many months or even years. And then you got to run it hard for years, and then you got to disassemble it and find the flaws. And then you got to re-engineer all of that. Just the process of getting it through the application, there's an incredible process that now they're going to shorten all of that, but they still can't get it together because 90% of the money is jacked for administration. It's stolen. They call it for administration, but it's stolen, right? And the administration, the money goes on to these Swiss bank accounts and credit cards, and they just go out and there's no auditing or anything like that. And it's just a free-for-all. They'll take the credit cards and they'll go and give it to the contractors to build swimming pools. They'll buy this nice shiny cars for the kids for graduation or for birthdays or whatever. They just loot the whole bloody thing. And they've been doing it for so long. That's the so-called entitlement thing about this industry we see. is that generation done it, this generation, then generation after generation, and they're the inbreeds, and so they're extremely entitled. They feel extremely entitled, and so we postulated this quite a while back that we would see it become insane, right? And that's what we're seeing. Over particularly last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we're seeing this true insanity. It's almost like a road rage when you're talking about the nuclear industry. When it comes to the way they treat the population, they treat them with nothing but contempt. As if, and they are above the law, right? Department of Energy funding for small modular reactors in June of 2017, Department of Energy issued a notice of intent to support the deployment of small modular reactors. Part of the funding comes from the President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. Well, it's not the President's bipartisan infrastructure law. $900 million to support the deployment of small modular reactors. That's chump change. The nuclear industry can't do anything with $900 million. Because time you take 90% of that's $100 million left over. That's not even enough money to throw at the regulatory agencies. They can't even do anything with $100 million. It doesn't. That kind of money means nothing to them. I'm not exaggerating. Unfortunately, I'm not misrepresenting the truth at all. I'm stating the fact that $900 million distributed out amongst a bunch of them is nothing. That's kickback. They're all going to come running with their hands out, and they're all going to put it in their back pocket. Some goes to their secretaries. They'll pay their bills or whatever right at the nuclear site or at the nuclear office. And then everything they can steal is stolen. And so that's what we're seeing is a looting. The bipartisan infrastructure law is a law that allows the industry to loot. Increased nuclear energy production legislation sent to Biden. Legislation from a North Carolina congressman with a goal to lower the energy bills for Americans. Nuclear doesn't lower energy bills. Nothing close to it. It's ridiculous to suggest you're going to lower an energy bill. To increase nuclear energy production. It might lower the bills in about 30, 40 years if they can build something in that frame. But you can't lower the bill with a nuclear reactor is the reality of it. So you can build all the reactors you want. You ain't going to be lowering any bills. Every reactor needs 2 gas, oil, and coal plants dedicated to it on top of that. They can't run on their own energy. How do you lower a bill with a nuclear reactor? There should be no or minor differences to resolve what should be next. President Joe Biden's desk for a signature. And Biden will sign that. He won't hesitate. But it doesn't mean nothing. It's not like they're going to start a nuclear renaissance. There is not going to be no nuclear renaissance. It's strictly about ripping off the Americans and anybody else that's foolish enough to invest in the nuclear industry. Nano-nuclear energy gains after acquiring a novel cooling tech. So they bought this cooling tech for small modular reactors, and small modular reactors don't even exist. But the idea now is that's getting a lot of traction today, and so they got a whole bunch of stocks going out onto the market now, right? And everybody's like, oh, this is great, you should buy this stock. And people are like, yeah, okay, buy. But you're buying stocks on something that don't exist. It's a Ponzi scheme. That's simply what it is, right? And look, Ukraine needs to develop nuclear energy. Ukraine do. I could show you videos of Ukraine right now. You'll have nightmares tonight with the madness that's in those videos from the so-called war. It's a staged war, right? It was meant to drive up commodities worldwide, and United Nations was the main puppet. The World Economic Forum and United Nations were the main puppet. What's the word for it? The ones who are pulling the strings. I can't remember. Don't matter. Nuclear energy, importantly, has zero atmospheric emissions. Look, zero atmospheric emissions. Again, this is, you see that in almost every major story where they'll use that narrative. Because the atmospheric emissions that they're alluding to are carbon-based, right? But once you take it out of the reactor, which is not very, within a year and a half, and you put it in a fuel pool, it's nothing but emissions. And it's the worst emissions conceivable. It's the most lethal to everything with replicating cells on the planet. And see, the way they do these narratives is because they know what they're doing. They know everything I'm telling you is 100% correct, and this is their way of hiding it. Because they got to say that over and over and over in order to hide it. Then how bad is it really, see? Has zero atmospheric emissions. This is ludicrousness to suggest that there's no emissions when you're powering 1 million homes and businesses. It's absurd to suggest it. In other words, there's also green energy, says the crazies. It is not renewable like solar or wind, but it's green energy, the lunatic says. This is not green energy. It doesn't have anything to do with green energy. And you can't call it zero emissions because it never stops emitting once you take it out of the reactor. It's a perpetual disease machine. It's perpetually splitting atoms. And they're the worst thing can happen to your body or your child or your friends or your families or birds or whales or insects or bacteria or fungus or anything. The statement was made by the Energy Club vice president on the air of the United News telethon. This is in Ukraine. So this guy is a real life monster, a real demon, a real sadistic, hateful degenerate. Energy Minister savaged for hysterical misinformation on nuclear. More from the crazies in Australia. There's never a shortage, is it? Victoria Energy Minister Lily has been accused of pushing sad, hysterical misinformation after she said the state government would never repeal its ban on deadly nuclear power. And that's exactly what it is. It's deadly nuclear power because it never stops emitting anthropogenic man-made radiation, which nothing on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against. And so here's the major media in Australia accusing her of hysterical misinformation, sad and hysterical. And she absolutely, positively has the moral high ground to equate it as deadly nuclear power. There really isn't any other way to articulate what nuclear power is besides deadly. I call it a disease factory, and I really should start using the word deadly disease factory to help drive the urgency of that narrative home, shouldn't I? Why nano-nuclear energy shares are exploding higher. Nano-nuclear energy shares are trading higher by 37.8% to 21.69 during Monday's session after the company announced it acquired an annular linear induction pump, intellectual property used in small nuclear reactor cooling and heat transfer. So you can aggregate that intellectual property, but that's simply just to trick investors. It's not like you're going to build a reactor. How come Nano is not building reactors? Why don't you? Don't have to have an experimental reactor. And how the hell do you get on the stock exchange without a product? This is just a terrible story about the waste isolation pilot project. Somewhere along the line they switched it and called it waste isolation pilot plant, but the name is actually waste isolation pilot project. It's in New Mexico. It had a meltdown in 2014 that they covered up. They spent $6 billion and said it was because of kitty litter. So kitty litter, you spent $6 billion. The new air system built at a nuclear waste site near Carlsbad, will it make WIP safer? And this is such an important story. No, it can't make WIP safer, you crazies. It's not 400 million, it's $486 million. That's the final number, right? Yeah, $486 million for a ventilation system that was contaminated. Like, you're talking $500 million. It's over $500 million. On a ventilation system, $500 million. On a contaminated radioactive ventilation system that began 6 years ago. They're still not finished. It won't finish until about 2028 or something. And costs have ballooned to about $486 million. It's over $500 million. We know because we cover it all the time. And so in 2014, WIP had a meltdown. And so I covered it for that whole week in particular, that first week in particular. We knew there was a meltdown. We had the evidence. We gathered it up, and I still have it today, right? And so WRQ, or I can't remember the media in New Mexico, they took one of my videos, which was like type like we're watching right now, but dedicated to the WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Project event, and they call me a conspiracy theorist. And the clip that they used, completely honest. It was right on the nose, too. And I had the documentation. And they put me up on TV in New Mexico because I was getting a lot of traction, apparently, and called me a conspiracy theorist. And so when I went and looked deeper down that rabbit hole, we ran into Raymond Gilmedy from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, which is another person that they use to counter people that are honest. And he works for the American Navy at Loveless Respiratory Research. And Loveless. And that's where they kill beagle dogs and beagle puppies. So it's the appropriate name is Loveless because it's a genocide machine for pets, right? Because that's where they're getting the beagle dogs and beagle puppies, obviously, is they're stealing. They have people out there that are stealing people's pets. And then they murder them with plutonium, typically. In the 2014 radiological releases of contaminated parts of the underground. Well, if it contaminated parts of the underground, then why did you spend almost over $500 million just on the ventilation system alone? That's a lot of money for contaminating parts of the underground, which was what was it? I don't remember the numbers. It was 150 football field size caverns. And so what they claimed happened was a drum ruptured after being emplaced for disposal. A drum ruptured. But it's supposed to be, the drums are supposed to be of transuranic waste, which is irradiated clothing. Irradiated clothing don't randomly catch fire. Almost all the waste at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project is coming from Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is legacy waste from the Manhattan Project. They're a slippery bunch, I can tell you that much. Cost ballooned to about $486 million. Began commissioning the system in 2023, but it won't get in full service till 2026. But we know that it'll be at least another couple of years past that before they actually get it up and running. So basically, it's if you do get up and running in 2026, that puts it at 12 years. 2014 to 2026, right? That's 12 years. I'm just trying to get the ventilation system rebuilt and replaced because of radiation. The whole story is insane. And because that's the only so-called repository, which is supposed to be a project, not an actual repository, it was supposed to be to see how putting metal down in sand or salt caverns would work. Would you store your, if you had pristine classic automobiles, would you put a salt around them? What do you think is going to happen? That includes testing the system and developing procedures for its use and training staff. Again, includes testing the system. So they got a $500 million system that's not even tested. And it's going to go into full service by 2026, maybe, perhaps we'll see. The system will filter air through 22 high-efficiency particulate air HEPA filter units. So first off, you can't filter out all the radiation because the atoms are the same size as every other atom. So the only way you can filter is to collect everything. And a filtration system is not going to do that. And then the other problem is now the filtration system becomes incredibly radioactive. And so the more radioactive you got into the filter system, as the air is going through it, it becomes radioactive particles. That's a double-edged sword because it's radiation. So, like, a filtration system doesn't work. And it has the incredible probability of making it perpetually worse. Brought into the facility via new air intake shaft being completed on the west end of the mine were 2 new panels intended to replace space lost in 2014 were being mined. Space lost? You had nuclear meltdowns. The emissions coming out of the elevator shafts on the videos are shocking. And they blame the smoke on a salt truck, which is like half a truck. They're very low because they're in a mine shaft, right? And the front tire had caught fire. And he said this is why they abandoned. It was a 55, maybe it was. Maybe the number is 55. I can't remember anymore. 55 football field sized caverns. Well, just give me a second. Let me see if I can find that clip. Because that's always a doozy, right? Let me go another way. One more try. Some videos, because they're so old, right? That's 2014. Some videos don't seem to work. Just give me a second if we can get another one up. Oh, that one's working. The other one didn't work. That one works.
A fire has shut down the WHIP site in Carlsbad. Officials say a truck hauling...
A fire has shut down 55 football field sized caverns. So 300 feet by 100 foot pitches. Got shut down because the front tire caught fire on one of these trucks. This is the truck they're showing, see? But the problem with the story was that everybody abandoned it. This was on Valentine's Day, right? Or they went to go back down on Valentine's Day, and they couldn't go back down because they said there was a radiological release there going on. So this happened, this is February the 5th, 2014. So 9 days later, nobody had returned to the mine shaft because a truck fire. Now, you see, they just... To redo their ventilation system cost $500 million. So they had incredible ventilation systems where transport trucks were going down there all the time. So they have ventilation systems can handle the emissions from multiple transport trucks and everything else. But it couldn't handle the fire, the front tire catching fire. The emissions from that kept them out of the mine shaft for 9 days. That's the official story. So clearly that's a cover story.
Salt caught fire about 11 this morning in an area underground. All employees were quickly evacuated, but several were taken to the hospital.
So if you've got a football field and you got a truck fire on one side of the football field of a front tire, are you going to evacuate? No. Imagine 55 football field size caverns. Would you evacuate all of that because a a front tire on a truck caught fire, because that's what they ultimately show you, see? And then would you stay out for 9 days because you had a truck fire? No. And then when he went to go back on the 14th, on Valentine's Day 2014, they couldn't go back down because they detected radiation. But the reality of it was, they sheltered in the place on that first day because it was a radiological release, and they hid it. And the 2 new panels intended to replace the space lost in 2014. So the panels are 300 feet by 100 feet. So 2 football pitches were lost, caverns that are underground, were sealed off because they had a nuclear meltdown in some of the drums. And we know everything is vented that goes to the site. So if you just got radioactive contaminated clothing and tools, you don't need to vent it. The only reason you need to vent it is because you got something in there splitting atoms. This risk could be compounded, he said, by WIP's handling of new radiological waste streams, such as from expanded plutonium pit productions at Los Alamos National Laboratory and Savannah Riverside. And these are incredible legacy places we're talking about. You're talking about, when you're talking about waste stream of plutonium pit productions, you're talking about, this is not contaminated clothing we're talking about. To protect the workers and the public, you need filtration. There's going to be contamination. There will be other accidents in the underground. Listen to that statement. There are going to be workers exposed. There's going to be contamination. To protect the workers and the public, you need filtration. So he's clearly saying there's going to be more nuclear meltdowns at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, isn't he? That's clearly what they're saying. Duttonheimer's big nuclear plant, a serious joke. It's mad, bad, and dangerous. The plan outlined by the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, is broadly dissed. Build 7 nuclear plants at the sites of existing or shuttered coal-fired nuclear stations. And so since Quasi-Electric said they were going to do that to geothermal in 2022, the nuclear industry is having seizures. Say, we could do it. They're not acknowledging this is where they got the idea from. But you see this showing up everywhere lately, right? Like Bill Gates is another one that stole the idea from Quasi-Electric. But Quasi-Electric is going to do geothermal, not disgusting, despicable nuclear. There will be a small modular reactor in South Australia and Western Australia. And the coalition laughingly believes this can be done by 2035, even though small modular reactors don't exist yet. The federal and state law prohibits it, and that there's no regulatory infrastructures. An investment in new large-scale renewable and storage projects will be killed, and contracts will be ripped up. Commissioning of the first floating nuclear plant for the Blamskis project is set for 2028. So they're claiming that they're going to have floating reactors built by 2028 in 4 years' time. Like, we've seen this narrative how many times? 4, 5, 6 times over the last number of years. Never seen anything come to fruition. Or even close to it. So now they're saying it's 106 megawatts to the consumers. 106 megawatts. And interval between refueling will be 5 years. We know it'll turn out to be 3 if to get it up and running. Units will be held in place by rigid mooring devices. And so you can see these kind of depictions right there. These cartoons. This is just cartoons. You can see ice for the Arctic and everything. Floating Cheronobyls. The more you build, the quicker you're going to have one meltdown. That's just the way it works in nuclear. Like WIP is guaranteed to get more nuclear meltdowns. These things are guaranteed. And not only that, there's no practice runs. They're just going to go ahead and build it. It's an industry with a hate on for our planet. And the ability to kill our planet too. Redeploying tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea could strengthen the nuclear umbrella against the Russian nuclear threat. And disgusting Bolton. What a despicable, useless, subhuman creature that turned out to be. And so that's what they're doing in South Korea. Because we covered that last night, I believe, didn't we? Could strengthen nuclear umbrella. We cover it all the time, but against Russia. So they're using North Korea in order to justify redeploying nuclear weapons to South Korea, saying we got it there for North Korea, but in reality it's there for Russia. Because you're literally on Russia's border, right, in South Korea. AIM WAFIS is helping to build a nuclear fusion reactor. So the WAFIS, these games are free, these video games. But you can buy with real cash outfits for your favorite character. And that money is then siphoned off and used to invest in fusion. These evil scum, man, they got so many ways. It's just unbelievable, isn't it? Sir, we hit another nuclear submarine. How the British and the French nuclear missile subs collided. They didn't even know each other was there. It's insane. Like, it's so insane. And these are huge. These are like 450 feet long, 138 meters. Yeah, 452 feet. So if you stood them on their head, they're these tall. And this is what they look like out of the water coming up. It doesn't really do it justice, right? And you're talking about it's about 17,000 tons, 34 million pounds of precious metal. And then all the electronics is used an absurd amount of precious metals on these disease factories. Yeah, 16,900 tons. I rounded it off to 17,000. Just 34 million pounds of precious metal. And for every day they're at sea, it's like 4 days in port for maintenance. They're higher maintenance than politicians, believe it or not. Creator of the artificial sun announced another nuclear fusion breakthrough. World's first achievement. Again, don't believe anything the fusion industry tells you. The fusion industry's got not who they claim they are at all. They're not about power. They're probably about opening up third dimensions or something like that, fourth dimensions. But it's all under the guise of free energy or something, right? But it's an experiment. That's what the Halon colliders, the fusion energy is strictly about experiments. And the experiments are about equations. And so they expend billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to do an experiment to see if a mathematical equation is valid. That's what most of this is all about. They discovered an advanced magnetic field structure that is being reported as a world first achievement. So everything's a world first achievement when it comes to this madness. It could help experts in enhancing control capacity of nuclear fusion devices. So they're going to use magnets to contain 212 million minimum degree Fahrenheit temperatures, 212 million degree temperatures. But they clearly acknowledge that the magnets probably won't work. It's an equation. But they have to go through the whole process. They need tens of thousands of scientists to pull it off and see if they can get it to sustain for a second or 10, right? It's a 100% idiot industry. That's the best way to describe it. Everybody wants nuclear now, which is simply not true. But right, there is no nuclear renaissance on top of that. Rolls-Royce teases Iron Man-like micronuclear reactor, which are over 400 megawatts. These are not micro-reactors. And the micro-reactors are reminiscent of the one created by the Marvel superhero Iron Man. Well, the reality of it is the Marvel superhero Iron Man didn't create a microreactor or fusion reactor. It's just Hollywood nonsense. We can all go out and create one with artificial intelligence, but it doesn't make it real. This week, the British company introduced its microreactor concept model. Their version of small modular reactors is over 400 megawatts, which at the time, a small modular reactor was 300 megawatts or smaller, which was still considered massive. But there was money allocated for small modular reactors, so they called it a small modular reactor, and the British government gave them something like $600 million. And when they blew that money, they started whining and sniveling. And so they gave them another couple of $100 million. And they won't put any of their own money into it, only the government's money, which is the taxpayers, the victims of society. Global demand for nuclear energy is escalating. That's not true. There's no evidence to back up those assertions, right? Peter Dutton's nuclear policy is a risky path forward for Australia. There is no path forward with nuclear. And when they can't show nuclear without showing farms for some reason, can they? And it would be at least 50% more expensive than solar and wind. The money for nuclear is enough to give them double geothermal for the whole country that they're planning on burning on nuclear. Let me see, I thought we were almost through all of this, but I guess I overdone it. Oh, we're not too bad. We're almost there. I didn't think I was going to make it this far tonight. I'll keep going. Groups seek EPA funding for updated, because we missed a day this week, we've got to try to make up for it, I guess. Groups seek an EPA funding for updated nuclear waste rules. The American Nuclear Society, 11 other organizations joined the letter to the Houses and the Senate Appropriators. Other signers include the Natural Conservatory, I can't even pronounce it. I must be going too long, am I? Oh, we're way up there. we're over 2.5 hours in, for goodness sakes. We only got a couple stories and then a little bit more to show you, and we'll get through that, I guess. What I got left to show is not really a lot of information, so let's just walk through the rest of it. Next Generation Energy passes a review for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Well, as far as I know, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has nothing to do with safety. It's more about the rubber stamping. It's a rubber stamping. So this is a uranium mine in Saskatchewan, and they need some pats on the backs, and this is what they're getting, right? The media is giving a bunch of pats on the backs and telling them to have a nice day. New Brunswick Power Executive denies exaggerating nuclear troubles to justify large rate hikes. This is an interesting story. Utility faced pointed questions, I doubt it, about whether its expenses are inflated. All right, and you see this cow right there, Laurie Clark. You got any idea how many people she's murdered with that nuclear disease factory there in New Brunswick? That CANDU reactor? They legally releases, just in the tritium-3H, 14,600,000 trillion atoms a year, which anywhere else would be a large nuclear accident. They legally are allowed to do it because they can't contain it. It's despicable. And it's right on the Atlantic Ocean in the Bay of Fundy on top of that. Well, I dove in that years ago, and it was a nightmare. New Brunswick Power President Laurie Clark. So they estimated they're going to need another $20 million this year. And so we covered stories about how they didn't do the maintenance. Normally you're going to spend, each nuclear plant typically spends $100 million every year. Minimum, sometimes much, much more, but minimum each year is $100 million on maintenance, which is over $250,000 a day on maintenance. These are the worst things that can happen to you. And they're going to double the rates this year and next year, or raise it by almost 10% each year for the next 2 years. And they're already started doing it. Radiation levels at Fukushima nuclear plant is 1,000 times over the acceptable levels after the earthquake. That's March the 12th. That's the day after. It's very unusual to get those numbers, isn't it? On the first day. That was unusual. And technicians are desperately trying to figure out ways to prevent the meltdown. That didn't go very good for him, did it? And then Chief Cabinet Secretary Yukio Idano, who is he's quoted as saying he didn't sleep for 4 days. All he done was talk to media nonstop for 4 days. And he told every one of them, there is no nuclear meltdown. There is no emissions. There is nothing wrong. Everything is great. Why the reactors were blowing up and melting down. And there he's saying, oh no, it could leak outside, but the wind will blow it out to sea, so don't worry about it. I got over 100 of these short videos. I posted a long time ago. These are 7-8 months ago or something. I posted these videos. In your shorts, normally shorts, that's where you get all your views on a short video, right? I get none. These little short, little tiny appropriate videos. So I got 3 views, 20 million particle fallout per liter in the US and Canada. I got 3 views. With the documentation and nice clean package. And if you managed to catch the beginning of the show tonight, that was that video right there. And then BBC reposted, pretends to be in Fukushima Reactor 4. We've covered that one a lot. But no views. Look, 4 views, 5. How harmful is Fukushima radioactive food from Japan? 30 million one-ton bags, 5 views. Fukushima Reactor 4 faked by the media, 4 views. Fukushima Nuclear Meltdown Reactors 4. Fukushima Media faked Reactor 4 fuel pool, Ellie, 5 views. These are unbelievable videos, by the way. These are very well done. I put an enormous amount of work into it. And I got next to no views on them. And every one of these will educate you if you're not familiar with the subject. I got over 100 of them there. Just because some of them got a couple 100 views don't mean they're the best ones. It just means I used them a lot in the beginning of my videos to get those extra views on it. But I literally got no views. Even after 7 months. And when I posted all these views, I had no views for months. And so I used to have 25,000 subscribers. When we were looking for spiders, they took down my site. Now I have 1.58 thousand on this new site. I've been here since 2021, August, was it? 2021? I have 254,000 lousy views. And I'm averaging, like my other site, I had lots of videos with over 1 million views. I had lots and lots of videos with 100,000 views. Lots and lots and lots. And I had, at one point I had 29,000. And then the next day I woke up, I had 25,000 subscribers because they deleted 4,000 subscribers. And they just gutted me constantly. And then when we were looking for spiders, they actually just took my site down. Because we were out in the woods on a research expedition looking for spiders, and you can't have that. That's a crime. And so all that work, 10 years of these, at almost 1,600 of these videos, like we're watching tonight, and there was 300 of them were taken down before that with gag orders and court orders to silence me on certain assets the nuclear industry had. I had gag orders for 3.5 years, for instance. But I actually had court orders to take down 300 of my videos to protect their assets. And do you think I can get a lawyer? And I fought a good fight. I've never stopped, eh? And those who supported me are the same, obviously. But we've been at this a long time. And we get better every day at telling this story and articulating it. And we're not doing it because of it's easy. And we get rain all this week, like 10 to 15 millimeters every single day. Except for maybe Saturday, I think. The weather could change, the forecast could change, but I'm shocked. Some days are 20, 25 millimeters. So we went through a lot of work to be able to go out and do research expeditions, and we can't get out there because of torrential downpours. I've never seen nothing like that. And it's just unbelievable what we're seeing happening. But summer is very late here, right? And it goes all the way up until September. And so it usually doesn't start here till the middle of July. That's when summer generally starts here. So we had a few good days of good weather, but then just yesterday was brutal. For instance, rain, right? Oh well. Let's come in and close the poll down, I suppose. We're through it. That's the show tonight. And because we missed the show this week, I wasn't expecting to get through everything tonight, but we did get through everything. We got incredibly, for a long show like this, only 27 votes. Only 23 likes, only 18 viewers. Bless your hearts, by the way. These are frightening low numbers for such the most important subject in human history. Is Australia pro-nuclear media blitz meant to make society incompetent so they can tiptoe nuclear in the back door? Clearly, it's 100% yes, and appropriately so. Thank you, everybody that did show up tonight. And I apologize I'm early, and I wasn't expecting them to make it this far. And hugs out for James Lucid, donated 200 last night. Bless your heart, my friend. Holy goodness. What would I do without you, man? I don't know what to say, boy. I thank you so much, you know. Such a difficult thing keeping this fire lit all the time. They're telling the truth and trying to do the moral and ethical thing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not hard, but it's not cheap either, right? But it's not hard to do the moral thing. That's one thing I know. Doing the moral thing is very natural. And I apologize for the long show tonight, but that's the way it goes sometimes. And it was an early show on top of that. So normally my show starts 15 minutes ago instead of a few hours ago. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Thursday night is the last show of the week. A very long, stressful day. And I just decided to do the show because I didn't think I would make it till this hour. Right? If I started the show 50 minutes ago like normal, there's no way I would have a show tonight. So I just want to hit it on the show. Just going to do it for you when you get the time to find it. And I know I'm going to get censored because the truth is a crime. It's an absolute crime, to be honest. And you're a bunch of criminals for hanging out here. You're criminals. You're the best thing that ever happened on this planet. Bless your hearts. I'll catch everybody tomorrow night for the last episode of the week. You have a great night and a great day tomorrow. Blinked out of there. A great day tomorrow. Hugs for everybody. Take care, folks. We'll see you on the other side.